When Night Falls at Devil's Den, Episode 6 of the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
It's not a good day to be a bad guy!
Hello, and welcome everyone to the podcast. I am your host, Wayne, along with my lovely co-host and wife, Michelle.
Hey there.
Coming to you from the glacial dumping grounds known as the Michigan Basin, where we cover such topics as UFOs, aliens, conspiracy theories, paranormal encounters, ghosts, the Michigan Dog Band, Bigfoot, and all things paranormal and strange in and around Michigan. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, everyone.
A big thank you to everyone who is sharing the podcast with friends and family. It is incredible the responses we have received and continue to receive. Our Facebook group and audience continues to grow by leaps and bounds as people interested in the paranormal and UFO sightings in and around Michigan find the podcast.
Including some of my students who are now trying to find the podcast and asking me in class, is this your podcast?
Exactly. We now have a public Facebook page for the podcast, and you can find us by searching for @MIUFOSPE, and that will get you to our public Facebook page. Stop on by and give us a like and a follow for news and events that are related to the podcast. Also, if you have a story that's related to UFOs or the paranormal from around Michigan, we would love to talk to you. You can reach out at us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. Send us an email, and we will schedule to have you come on podcast, and you get a chance to tell your story. We are continuing our search for anyone with information or was witness to the 1966 UFO flap in the Ann Arbor-Dexter area. If you are someone or know someone who experienced this time in Michigan history, and we would love to have you come on the podcast and relate your experience for the audience. If you like the podcast, the content we cover, and are interested in supporting the podcast, you can now help by going to our Anchor public page and click the support button. This will give you 3 different levels of a monthly contribution you can make. It is not required, but any help is appreciated. A link will be provided in the show notes. And now it's time for...
What's in the news?
Yes, what is in the news? Former Navy pilot recalls seeing hundreds of UFOs, calls them security threat. Brian Graves tells 60 Minutes the unidentified objects are a security threat.
So the stories are now hitting 60 Minutes.
Yes, that was an amazing show that they did about UFOs, and here they are in the news again as we get closer to June 10th.
I grew up in a household where 60 Minutes was a staple.
Oh, yes,
so
absolutely.
So the fact that this story is now hitting 60 Minutes, it's like, okay.
Now everybody wants to listen.
Now I'm getting approached even about, did you see that episode on 60 Minutes?
Oh, yes. Our inbox is getting inundated with information about UFO sightings, and yeah, people are coming up to me.
I know my coworkers are starting to approach me now. Did you watch that episode on 60 Minutes?
Yeah, what's going on with this stuff? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. So it says here, a former Navy pilot, and this is brought to us by way of foxnews.com, though this article is pretty much circulating everywhere because of the 60 Minutes interview. It says a former Navy pilot says he witnessed UFOs flying in restricted airspace off the coast of Virginia nearly every day for 2 years, beginning in 2019.
Okay, so we've heard of the sightings off the coast of California, but now off the coast of Virginia.
Yeah, and if you watch the interview with David Fravor on the Joe Rogan show many months ago, he does talk about his quote-unquote friend who said that he has seen them on the East Coast as well. And I take it this Lieutenant Graves is probably that friend he's talking about.
It's got to be.
Former Lieutenant Ryan Graves told 60 Minutes that the unidentified objects, like one seen in a Pentagon-confirmed Navy video near San Diego, are a security threat.
So it goes on to say the latest firsthand account comes a month ahead of a report by the National Intelligence Director and Secretary of Defense on unidentified aerial phenomena, a measure that was included in a COVID-19 relief bill passed in December. The article goes on to say, I am worried, frankly, if these were tactical jets from another country that were hanging out up there, it would be a massive issue, Graves said, according to a clip of the 60 Minutes interview. But because it looks slightly different, we're not willing to actually look at the problem in the face. We're happy to just ignore the fact that these are out there watching us every day. Now, seamen who have seen the unidentified objects believe they could be a secret U.S. technology, enemy surveillance devices, or something entirely different, Graves told CBS. This is a difficult one to explain. You have rotation, you have high altitudes, you have propulsion, right? I don't know. I don't know what it is, frankly, the lieutenant told correspondent Bill Whitaker as he watched an unclassified video. He went on to say, I would say, the highest probability is it's a threat observation program, Graves said, according to the report. A former defense official who spent years investigating unidentified aerial phenomena told the network program that the vehicles have technology vastly exceeding any human invention.
Imagine a technology that can do 600 to 700 G-forces, that can fly 13,000 miles an hour, that can evade radar, and can fly through air and water and possibly space. And by the way, has no obvious signs of propulsion, wings, no control surfaces, and yet can still defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity. That's precisely what we're seeing, and this was said by Luis Elizondo. This story first appeared in the New York Post. So Luis Elizondo was the former head of ATIP. So something else I wanted to add to this was that Tucker Carlson on Fox News had a reporter on from the Washington Examiner. His name was Tom Rogan. And they were talking about the spherical objects that were captured on camera off of a U.S. destroyer that hovered over the ocean. You can see it fly into view. It's spherical in nature. It hovers over the ocean and then disappears into the water. And in the background, you can hear the crew members say splash, splash, like something crashed into the water. Now, conjecture, speculation has it that the U.S. Navy sent out a submarine to look for any kind of a wreckage, and they couldn't find anything, as if it was a vehicle that might have crashed into the water looking for survivors, those kind of things, or any wreckage floating on the water. That wasn't found. Now, apparently, in this report that's coming out in June, it's going to talk about how U.S. Navy submarines have data on submerged UFOs, or USOs, unidentified submerged objects, moving at hundreds of knots underneath the water. And they have the data from the sonar contacts and things like that from submarines. And they don't know what these things are. Now, the best place to hide a UFO is places where you can't see very easily into. And one of those places is definitely the ocean. So they could operate under there with no one ever knowing that they're there.
All day and all night.
Exactly, because you can't just look deep into the ocean and look around. There's no light. There's no people around to see it, so it just kind of makes sense. And we know more about outer space than we do about the depths of our oceans, because we just don't have the technology to get down there and understand what's going on.
Let's start off with some shout-outs.
All right. So first of all, let's talk about Contact in the Desert 2021. This will be a virtual event held on June 25th through the 28th. If you're interested in Contact in the Desert, all you have to do is go over to contactinthedesert.com and you can find out more details. Now, even though this event is happening the 25th through the 28th, you do have a total of 2 weeks beyond those dates that you can listen and watch the virtual event as it took place.
We also need to make sure that we give a shout out to our guys at the Lost in the Dark podcast, hosted by Burton and Aaron. This is a pretty cool podcast that bills itself as an attempt to capture incredible conversations between best friends as we explore all of our passions, but especially music and the world of heavy metal. So if you're into paranormal investigations and loud, heavy metal music, give them a listen. Strong language, but it's heavy metal and the paranormal. What else would you expect?
And what's going on with that show and us, Michelle?
We are going to be guests on the show in about a week.
That's correct. So we will be recording a show with them on their podcast, and we'll make sure to direct you guys over so you can listen to the hilarity that will ensue if you are so inclined. But it'll be a good time. And last but not least, over to our friends at the Midnight Truck Stop, hosted by Big T and Blue Knight. A very cool couple of guys with a great concept as they explore those strange and unexplained incidents that so many of us have experienced while traveling along desolate highways. Give them a listen as they collect stories from all around the country from truckers and travelers alike. Well, Michelle, I think it's time for a break. What do you think?
I think it's time to hear from one of our sponsors. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Join me, George Norrie, for the Worldwide Contact in the Desert Virtual UFO Conference, June 25th to June 28th. Contact in the Desert is an epic weekend of adventure, jam-packed with exciting explorations into UFOs, ancient civilizations, AI, crop circles, forbidden archaeology, disclosure, and the newest evidence of ongoing contact, sightings, and leading-edge science. This amazing weekend delivers more than 130 presentations and special events showcasing 67 speakers from all over the world, with 2 extra weeks to view your favorite leading experts, including Avi Loeb with Clyde Lewis, Linda Moulton Howe, Paul Hellyer, John Lear, Russell Targ, David Childress, Doc Wallach, and more. With breaking articles in the New York Times and acknowledged naval sightings, and more importantly, the new release of classified documents on the day of the soft opening of Contact in the Desert, we are your source for inside information. Join us June 25th at contactinthedesert.com to get your tickets today. Make contact, contactinthedesert.com.
Coming up next, we have Mr. Terry Lovelace. So to let you know just a little bit about his background, he is a 6-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force, serving on active duty from 1973 to 1979. He completed a bachelor's degree in psychology from Park University and a law degree from Western Michigan. His legal career began in private practice until his appointment as an assistant attorney general for the U.S. territory of American Samoa. He also served as an assistant attorney general for the state of Vermont until his 2012 retirement. Stories have continued to unfold from Devil's Den State Park in northwest Arkansas during a remote camping trip in June of 1977. Both Mr. Lovelace and a friend on active duty at the time. What followed were 43-plus years of nightmares, phobias, and PTSD-like issues. In 2012, a routine leg x-ray discovered 2 anomalous objects in his leg. The x-rays are on his website at terrylovelace.com. That event was the catalyst to write the books and speak publicly about his experiences. For fear of losing his job and the respect of his peers in the legal community, he waited until 2018 to self-publish Incident at Devil's Den, a #1 bestseller on Amazon. His second book, Devil's Den: The Reckoning, was published the week of Christmas 2020. It was the number one in new releases immediately and hit the number one bestseller status on February 10th. Since March of 2018, he's been a radio podcast guest over 100 times on a variety of different shows, and now including ours. He's spoken at UFO Congress, Contact in the Desert, the Roswell UFO Festival, UFO Con, Alien Con, the Ascension Conference in Sedona, and the Ozark Digital Conference. His story was featured on an episode of the Travel Channel's My Horror Story, which originally aired in November of 2019.
So now, ladies and gentlemen,
Without further ado,
Mr. Terry Lovelace. Well, everybody, we are here with the one and only Mr. Terry Lovelace. Terry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here, Wayne.
A former Michigander.
I am. I'm proud of it.
I believe you say in your bio that you went to Western Michigan for your law degree.
I did.
So there is the Michigan connection here.
Definitely. My son's a graduate of Michigan State. I had a law office in Lansing for a long time, early 90s.
Okay. All right. So basically what I want to do is let our audience hear your story. And I will try to interject some questions. And if Michelle's got anything to add, she will add in some things as we go. But just like, take it away.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
Okay. I need to briefly visit 2012 because that's actually when things kind of developed. I had the experience, the abduction actually in June of 1977. And my wife is familiar with it. We were together then, together still. And but I never told a soul. I made my living in the law, and then I became a public servant. And I knew that I'd lose my job with the government, and I'd lose the respect of my peers in the legal community, and it'd be the end of my legal career. I mean, it's like my friends in academia or some levels of law enforcement or air traffic controllers. You know, there's a but I think that's going to change soon.
June 10th, right?
we're crossing fingers.
We'll see what they say.
Yeah, I've got a list of people to tell. I told you so.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, when you get when I get those sideways glances at work, like, wait a minute, you're a science teacher and you're doing what with a podcast? Hey, have you not been paying attention to the news and the government telling you?
But yet, Terry, I've got students coming in today and quoting the podcast to me as they're walking in the room.
I love it.
I was like, that's great.
How old are the kids that you teach, if I could ask?
I have middle schoolers. So you're looking at anything from 12 to about 15.
Yeah. And then I teach high school, 9th grade, which are 14 to 15-year-olds. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, they're curious. You know? Yeah.
They want to know like everyone else. So what happened to me was I retired from the state of Vermont, where I was state's attorney for the Board of Medical Practice in January of 2012. And we moved to Dallas area where we have our 2 kids and grandchildren. October of that year, I had a pain in my right knee, and it was really difficult to walk. So I had my wife take me to the emergency room at the VA hospital, and they x-rayed my leg. And when they did, they found 2 what they called anomalies. And I don't know if you have my x-rays.
I do. I've got one of them that you sent along to me, and then there was a couple other pictures up on your website.
Yeah, terrylovelace.com I think has the pair. And
right.
What they found was an item above my knee. By the way, neither one of these items had anything to do with the pain in my knee. The pain in my knee was caused by a Baker's cyst, just a benign thing you catch. I mean, like you catch a cold. 2 weeks of pain, it goes away, you're good to go.
Right.
But they found these images in the process, and above my knee, there's a square structure that's obviously manufactured and has 2 wires connected to it that go up my leg. And then below my knee, there's a floret pattern of well, what the radiologist said looks like bone tissue. And when I was in the ER, when I looked at those images, I was stunned because where the image above my knee is located is the spot that I used to call my numb spot, because I was a runner, an avid runner, and really enjoy. I didn't run marathons, but I ran 4 or 5 miles a day, but I ran almost every day. And every time I would hit the 2-mile mark of my run, I mean, give or take 50 yards, the spot on my right knee would go completely numb. And I could take a safety pin and delineate the edges of it. And it was about the size of a $50, but it was a perfect circle. And after about 30 minutes after my run, it would wear off and go away. It was kind of itchy and numb, kind of like a little like Novocaine in your mouth from the dentist. And I asked my doctor about it, and she says, well, does it affect your run? And I said, no, because really it didn't. And she says, well, it sounds like some type of histamic reaction. She says, if it doesn't affect your run, I wouldn't worry about it. So
Okay.
I didn't. But yeah, that object that they found in my leg in October 2012 is right underneath that spot that would go numb. And, when I saw these, they brought the radiologist down actually to look at the x-rays, which is very unusual. They took 24 shots in total. And the radiologist comes down and he looks at the x-ray of above my knee and he says, were you in some kind of accident? And I said, no. He says, well, I bet you got a heck of a scar. I said, no, I have no scars whatsoever. And he says, oh, you have to have a scar because it's impossible to violate the integrity of the skin and put something this deep into tissue and fascia and there not be a scar. So I took my pants off again and he took a look. And of course, there is no scar.
So there's no evidence of any kind of a cut or anything on the outside of your skin that would indicate something being put into your leg?
None. And he was visibly shaken. And I said, doctor, let me ask you, how often is it that you find an object like this in the body and there not be a corresponding scar? And he said, I've been a radiologist 23 years and I've never seen it before. He says, I cannot account how this thing got into your leg. And then he addressed the images of the things below my knee that are like a floret pattern of bone. And he says, I can tell from the x-ray film, the density, these things are bone tissue, living bone tissue. But he said, what makes it so unusual is I've never seen bone sprout in the middle of a muscle tissue before, and then sprout multiple times and then arrange themselves in a symmetrical pattern. And he says, it's just, I've never seen this before. So that really changed things. That was a epiphany for me because I really faced the fact that these things really did put their hands on me.
Was that at the point where your story going back to 1977 really came back into light, where you remembered what happened, or have you always remembered what happened?
I've had, understand, I have snippets of memory, like from being in the ship and such.
Yeah.
And they play back as nightmares. And, 2 or 3 times a year, I'll have, a screaming nightmare. And it's a repeat of the same ones. And I have to wait for it to play out before I can wake myself up. And I also still have what I called intrusive thoughts, which the psychologist told me you're actually experiencing flashbacks from the PTSD. Or I'll be cutting grass, or I'll be, setting the table. I'll be doing something completely unrelated. And then I'll have these images, sharp as day, flash in front of my mind. And then my heart races and so, okay. Yeah, that was a pivotal moment. I was determined to take this to my grave and never speak about it. But that changed things. And after that, I was determined to write a book and speak about it. And it took me a while to gather all the information, to do some research, because I wanted to research Devil's Den. I was fortunate enough to have, my wife, I credit her, saving the notebooks that I had, because I had 2 spiral ring notebooks with everything, every fact I could think of. I was very concerned for a time that the OSI was going to take me to court for something. I didn't know what, trespass on the federal land or whatever. So if there was going to be a court martial, I wanted to have as much evidence as I could collect
Yeah.
I wasn't a lawyer then, but, I mean, it made common sense for me to, and I just felt compelled to preserve it. So.
Now, when do you think, do you have a time frame that you think that those objects were implanted in you? Like, was it from the 77 experience, or was it when you were younger or taken later?
I asked the radiologist in Vermont, could these have been remnants of objects in my leg as a child? And she said that's very doubtful because of looking at the bone tissue and because of the thing below my knee. At least the thing below my knee developed in adulthood. So, it would have been consistent with happening for me at age 22.
Okay.
That's when I think it happened.
Okay.
But I have no memory of that whatsoever. And that's an assumption on my part. But
right.
The only thing I know for sure is that it did happen.
Yeah. Well, the evidence is overwhelming. And speaking about what happened, why don't we take a trip back to 1977 and explain to our listeners what happened? What do you remember and what the books are about? Let's just open it up.
Yeah, happy to. It's the meat and potatoes of everything. My friend, I worked in the ER. I was an EMT, first responder. We drove an ambulance. Worked the night shift, 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. I worked for 3 years with the same guy, Tobias, and he and I were best of friends. Our wives were friends. We had a decent relationship. On our days off, we'd play cards. So the four of us would play volleyball or something. Just nice people. We both lived on the base at Whiteman Air Force Base in family housing, and it was interesting. He came up to me one night and said, "Hey, man, I got an idea. Let's go camping." And I knew he was from the city of Flint. I knew I was from St. Louis City. I'd never been camping. I pretty much knew he hadn't been camping either.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's up with this? And he says, well, think about it. He says, because this guy, Toby, just lived to watch the night sky. I mean, he knew the constellations. He could time satellites when they would come over. I mean, he was obsessed with the night sky.
Seems a very interesting hobby, or interest, I should say, for a city dweller, for somebody from the inner city to all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but at least to have an interest in astronomy. And wow. Anyways.
Yeah, and he was a gifted mathematician too. I mean, we had an extension college from Central Missouri State University on base. Okay. And he took a couple of college level physics classes and, aced them both. And I'm sure he would have made a great astronomer or cosmologist.
Now, when you were working as a medic, this was while you were in the Air Force.
Yes,
right?
I enlisted in 1973, right out of high school, and served for 6 years until 1979, when I left active duty and became a civilian. So, Toby said, "Yeah, let's go camping." He said, "I want to have a chance to look at the night sky without light pollution." And he says, and I know, and my hobby was photography. I had a little dark room set up. I developed black and white prints. And I had a new camera that, you can't really use. You can't walk around with a camera on a nuclear base and take pictures. It's just frowned upon. Yeah,
that's an interesting point that we should say too, is that the base that you were stationed on was a strategic air command base, right? A SAC base with nuclear weapons.
It was. It had a squadron of B-52s. With the KC-135 flying gas stations right behind them. Mm-hmm. And then there was a squadron of Minutemen II ICBM missiles spread out all over the countryside.
Yeah.
They were there. They got pulled in 1995, I believe, and moved up north to more desolate area because, the area grew so much. Actually, Whiteman is the home of the B-2 bombers now. That's where they stay.
Okay, yep. Okay.
So Toby and I'll cut through a lot of stuff and get to the evening. We made our way down, we entered the park, and we previously agreed that we would not stay in the campground because the light pollution, and number two, we didn't want people all around us. I mean, it'd be like going camping in Walmart's parking lot or something.
Right.
And I mean,
right.
we'd never been camping before, but we're like, we want to be real outdoorsmen, right? So we took a paved road that turned into a dirt road, turned into a gravel road, and we made a few turns. And I let Toby navigate because that's the way we always rolled. Is that he was the navigator. Even when we drove an ambulance, he was always the navigator because he had an unerring sense of direction, where I don't. So we're driving, and he led us directly to this plateau, and we found the road that went straight up. And when we drove up on it, and this place was just a beautiful open meadow, and it was gorgeous, and we were just like, ooh, high five, and this is where we're going to stay. And eventually we set up camp. We did all the fun stuff you do when you go camping because it was all new to us,
Right.
and we enjoyed it. We had fun. And then later in the evening, around 9:00 p.m., we were sitting on, we're laying back, kicked back on these air mattresses. We got the campfire between us. We got our $10 Kmart tent in back of us.
Yeah.
And, the cooler's there. We're not drinking. I think we had a can of beer, I think we brought either 4 or 5 beers total for the 2 days. So it's not like we weren't using any drugs. We were subject to urinalysis frequently. So we are up there sober as can be. And, this sounds so cliche. I'm embarrassed to admit it. And I tell about it in Devil's Den, incident at Devil's Den, that the place went quiet because it did. And there were crickets and tree frogs that were so loud that we were having trouble carrying on a conversation back and forth across the campfire. And when it went quiet, except for the crackling of the campfire, it would have sounded like you were in a sound booth. And not only was it quiet, it was still. I don't remember if I even mentioned this in the book or not, but we lost the breeze that we had. And it gave me an eerie vibe. And my friend, of course, like he's going to know, says, oh, yeah, look, we've been laughing and cutting up. Don't worry about the bugs. They'll be back.
Right.
So I'm kind of putting it in the back of my mind. And we carry on conversation. And he turns his head to the west. And he says to me, Terry, were those lights there on the horizon? And I'm like, what lights? Because I knew there weren't any lights. And at first I couldn't see him because his torso was in the way. And I stood up and I saw there was a cluster of 3 little stars in a tight triangle above the horizon. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from like a parking lot or a train. And they were absolutely stationary. And we're debating what they are, right? And because I'm thinking it's some kind of weird plane, because we were familiar with aircraft, but we didn't know any kind of plane that had that kind of tri-light configuration in the front. I thought it might be a plane headed directly in our direction, and we just couldn't see it move until it deviated its course by a degree or two, and then it looked like it's moving.
Right.
So, but we watched it, and for a couple minutes, and then it finally did move. But what it did was it rotated like it were on an axis, and the 3 in unison, all remained equidistant to one another and did about a 120-degree turn. And this pyramid aligned itself, or actually not a pyramid, I'm sorry, triangle, aligned itself with the base of the triangle level with the horizon. And while we're watching it, a minute or two later, it took off and went straight up. Slowly at first. I don't know the distance. I assume some miles. It's on the horizon. And I'm asking Toby, I'm like, man, you're the space guy. What is this thing? Is this in, because the lights were kind of twinkling.
Right.
And I thought that would have meant that they would have had to been outside of our atmosphere. And he says, man, I don't know what these are. And while we're watching, something really peculiar happens. And that is that just like when the forest went calm, I can't explain this, but both of us experienced this calm, this really half sedated feeling. And all that anxiety and nervousness that I had about the quietness in the forest, that was all gone. And I felt semi-sedated. And I felt dissociated in some way. I felt like an observer. I was, distanced from it. I was an observer. I wasn't a participant. It's a weird place in my head, but that's the best I can describe
Almost like an out of body experience.
Yeah, I've talked to some NDE people who contacted me, and they told me they experienced the same thing when they left their bodies, is that they felt that dissociated feeling, that calm, no panic, and they're looking at their body, and that should elicit some kind of emotional response. Just like with us, we saw these things in the sky that surely should have elicited some kind, our emotions were just muted. We were just, and I think it speaks directly to the level of influence that these things have over us. We were under their influence when things fell silent. I think that's when their influence began, because I think they first influenced the bugs before they did us.
Yeah. Now, go ahead. I'll come at you with another question here.
Break in anytime. So seriously. So we're watching this thing, and we're seeing these 3-star configuration go straight up, and it got smaller, and then it reached the ceiling. I'm guessing 10,000 feet. I don't know. I got nothing to base that on. And then it changed orientation to flat, where it was parallel with the Earth. And then we could see three points of light, with the middle being the apex of the triangle, pointed directly in our direction. And then it started on this glide plane downward. And again, our emotions were muted. I mean, two human beings sharing an experience like this should be saying, using what I'm seeing, what is this thing, validating each other's experience, but there was none of that.
Now, do you think that did you ever get the feeling that you guys were being observed when you first noticed it? Like, did you get that eerie feeling? Like sometimes people get that sixth sense of like, we're being watched, kind of a thing. Did you get that at all during this time?
No, quite the opposite. I got that dissociated, calm. I broke my arm once, and they gave me a drug called Versed.
Okay.
And that's I looked it up because it was an odd sensation, and that's a hypnotic. And it also has an amnesia quality, which lets you forget some of the unpleasantness. But it was absolutely good pain management. I really didn't have any pain.
All right.
But it put me in this weird place that reminded me of where we were back in '77 when we were on the plateau. So go ahead.
I was just going to ask, did Toby have any reaction once you saw the apex of this triangle craft kind of point toward you and start moving toward you guys at all?
The only thing I can remember him saying was, "They're really moving now." And I mean, being plural, but we knew we were looking at one single solid object. I don't want to use the word they, but it or they being the pilots, whatever it was. Because as they started the glide plane down, it was moving faster. And I remember him saying that. But other than that, there was no conversation back and forth between us, like there probably should have been. And this thing glided in and stopped directly over the top of this meadow at about, I'm guessing, but I bet I'm pretty close, 3,000 feet. And at this point, we could not see the side of it. All we could see was the underneath of it. And it was big.
It just covered up the sky right above you.
It did. And, thankfully, we had camped off to the side. If we'd have camped where I wanted to camp, directly in the center of the plateau, and my buddy was real. Matter of fact, that was kind of an unusual exchange. He would usually cave, if I really wanted to do something.
Right.
But he was dead set against that. He wanted to camp off by the tree line. And I'm glad we did, because that way this thing wasn't directly over our heads. We were offset just a bit.
Right.
And
now, if people are interested, you can do what I did is I went on to Google Maps and I did a search for Devil's Den State Park, Arkansas. And when that pops up, if you look from the little target marker of Devil's Den and look to the northwest, you will see a very bizarre almost triangular shaped clear cut area. And that is where you and Toby camped. And I will put this information up on our website with these screenshots that I took, because I took screenshots of these. And so everybody can get instead of just a mental picture, a visual of this area where they camped. And it still looks clear cut to this day with some very interesting marks in the ground that some of them look like vehicle, maybe, a vehicle that went up there to continuously cut or clear off this plateau area. But other ones are very symmetrical, look like solid impressions that you can see from a satellite. So it has to be big. So I guess, Terry, how big is that cleared out area of Devil's Den, roughly?
It's roughly a city block.
Okay.
A long city block on each length of the three. And the thing that we saw was exactly the same size, a city block at length on all sides. So
it would just fit into this area.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, it was strange. I got this, I finally got this image to load, and I'm sending it to you right now.
Okay.
That has the picture.
The elevation.
Yeah.
Okay. And how high
you,
up? How high up does it say that area, that clearing is above sea level?
I don't have that.
Okay.
But what I remember was this, that the top of that plateau was dead level with the treetops. So, and it was thick forest, pine trees, mix of deciduous trees. But yeah, it was absolutely level with the treetops.
Wow.
So, I mean, you couldn't see, if you were hunting for the place, you had to be right up on it to find it.
Right. Or from above.
Or from above, yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm looking at the images and I can tell all the way around this clearing is, other than looks like a small trail coming into that clearing, it is thick forest all the way around that area.
I noticed on those Google images that there are some buildings you can see if you back out.
Yep.
And I can assert that back in 1977, none of that was there.
Yeah.
This was a remote area in 1977.
Yeah. So everybody, we do have to remember as well that this is taking place now like 50 years ago. So like Terry is saying, if you do look at the area and you see there are some buildings, again, scale's kind of hard without the actual map scale listed on the images, but they're few and far between now. It's not like it's built up around there or anything like that, but it does look like one of the images I saw looks like somebody had a very nice like camper sitting in a clearing. And you can tell because there's like the awning that's pulled over. You can tell it's a long rectangular shaped type of vehicle. You can tell that from the satellite imagery, which is kind of scary to think that you can find somebody camping in a satellite photo, in the middle of the woods. But you can definitely tell that's a newer. You wouldn't find a vehicle like that, I guess I should say, in 1977 that looks like that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So,
I don't know if we mentioned for the audience or not that is federal land owned by the Bureau of Land Management.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you. In the book, you had talked about you had to go through a gate to get to this area.
Yeah, and I'm told by someone that visited there recently that there still is a chain that keeps you from getting onto the property. And when we were there was a chain. There were two posts on either side of the road, and a chain that went across. And in the middle was a very sternly worded "Keep out, do not enter" sign. No hunting, no camping, no fishing, no nothing. No nothing.
Right.
And it had a government emblem on it, but we didn't pay any attention. I'm sure it was a federal emblem. And I thought, oh, we got to back up and go find another way. And Toby, who's on the passenger side, says, no, man, wait a minute, I got this. He hops out of the car. And what they had done is they'd taken that chain and looped it and formed a noose with a padlock. And they just draped it over the opposing post on a nail. Because, Rangers are busy, man. They don't have
right.
keys, they can get out of the truck, drop it, drive in. So that's what we did. We dropped it and we drove in. And we probably should have put that chain back up, but we didn't think about it. I don't know if it makes any difference or not, really.
Right. Well, you might have had issues when you left there. If it was up, you would have had to stop and
take it back down.
take it back down. And now, whose idea? Now, this is interesting. Whose idea was it to go to this place called Devil's Den for camping?
Toby's.
Toby's.
This was Toby's idea.
The astronomer.
And it was an obsession. I mean, it really did. It became an obsession.
Well, in the book, you say you guys were hesitant to go along with the idea, but he was completely fired up for the whole idea for like a couple weeks ahead of time, and then you kind of jumped on board, like, yeah, we're gonna go be outdoorsmen. Is that?
I kind of got on board with it, especially when we had the discussion, and I'm like, man, why are we going to drive 6 hours when we're within 30 minutes of a bunch of nice parks?
Right.
And he made the point, sometimes the journey is half the adventure. Let's have a road trip. Let's make this fun.
Yeah.
So he had a point. I didn't know then that the history of this place. If I'd known that, I would never have gone there.
Oh, okay. What is some of that history? What did you find out?
Well, let me tell you real quick. I during the year that I wrote the book in 2017, I subscribed to a couple of Arkansas papers, and I looked for stories relative to Devil's Den. And I found that in March of 2017, there was a young lady named Monica Murphy from one of the local small towns who went missing. Young mother, children at home. And a week after she went missing, they found her at the bottom of a 100-foot cliff where she had jumped or fallen. And the Bartlesville medical examiner ruled it a suicide. I don't know any more details. I would love to have had an autopsy report to see how he arrived at that conclusion. But that was the first one. The second one, which was much more dramatic, was in August of 2017, from Bartlesville, Oklahoma. There was a young man named Rodney Letterman, and he and his friend drove down to Devil's Den with the idea of either camping or staying. It's not quite clear, but the two of them parked their truck in the parking lot and went for a walk on the Butterfield Trail. And that Butterfield Trail cuts right through the center of the park. And it's called the Butterfield Trail because it was part of the Butterfield Stagecoach Line, which was the first intercontinental stagecoach line.
Okay.
And which was in operation until 1859, right before the Civil War. They quit operation. And it's paved now, and it's a nice walk. It's an easy walk. And you can walk on it for miles. And the two of them were walking. And they're about a mile and a half into their walk. And Rodney, who had asthma, tells his friend, hey, I forgot my inhaler. I forgot. I'm having an asthma attack. Would you mind running back and to the truck and grabbing it for me? And his friend's like, sure, no sweat, man. So his friend runs back to the truck, grabs the inhaler, and he's back in 35, 40 minutes. And there's no Rodney Letterman. Now, there are other people on the trail, too. They're not out there alone. And he finds Rodney's phone laying on the ground. I don't know about you, but my phone's either in my pocket or in my hand. I wouldn't lay it on the ground.
Absolutely. Yep.
And plus, Rodney was having an asthma attack. The terrain off of the trail was pretty rugged, and I don't think he could have navigated that.
Right. Did they ever find what happened?
Well, I got this from a Russellville Police Department, Russellville Sheriff's Department, deputy sheriff, uh, with the agreement of anonymity. He told me that they brought in their hounds because they have bloodhounds to try to catch a scent, and they went to the truck and they caught a scent from something in Rodney's, and the dogs were on a trail, and they tracked the trail right to the phone, and then they sat down. And I said, well, I know nothing about dogs. What does that mean? And he said, that means the trail ends. And I said, well, where could he have gone? And he said he could have gone up or he could have gone down, but the trail ended. So my guess would be up.
Yeah.
But what happened was, and I wrote that in the book when I published it in March of 2018. And I said I'd update the readers if if something changed. And in March of 2019, something did change. And there was this young couple walking down the trail. And the young lady says to her friend, "Is that an albino turtle?" And there was like an 8-foot large log cut that was lining the trail. And right in the center of it, perfect center, there was a triangular shaped white thing. And the gentleman walks over and picks it up, and he immediately recognizes that it's human bone. And it was the top of Rodney Letterman's skull with jagged edges.
Oh, wow.
Bleached white in the sunshine. And, you know, from my days as a prosecuting attorney, I mean, the first thing I thought of was that's a staged crime scene.
Yeah.
Because the park rangers were adamant that wasn't there the day before, or they would have noticed it, because it was just so open and obvious. And it was sent, they treated it as a crime scene with a forensic protocol and shipped the bone off to the Bartlesville, Oklahoma medical examiner, who determined by DNA that it was the remnants of Rodney Letterman. And that is all they've ever found of Rodney Letterman.
That was it.
That was it. Not another bone, not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, nothing. So, yeah, it's you know what? Like I said, I didn't know that the place had such a weird history. When I was writing the book, I reached out to the area that Devil's Den is in has there are two Native American tribes that lay claim to the area, the Caddo and the Kahino tribe. And I talked to a woman who was a medicine woman from the Caddo tribe in Russellville, Arkansas, who told me, yeah, you know, she was very kind. She says, from oral tradition, I can't tell you years, but I can tell you many generations. That's been we consider that cursed land. We'll cut across it to transit from point A to point B, but we won't camp, hunt, or fish there. So from there, I through a connection from my son at Michigan State, I talked to an archaeologist who was familiar with they call it the Ozark region, southern Missouri, northern Arkansas. And he said that there are Neolithic points, you know, going back 9,000 years, found all around there. And Native American arrowheads dating back a couple thousand years or so. But nowhere within Devil's Den, within the state park, have they ever found a Neolithic tool or remnants of a campsite. So, you know, I guess nobody can tell me where the name Devil came from.
I was just going to ask you, do you have any background on why they gave it the name Devil's Den? And I understand there's a cave system, or there is a cave that gets mentioned as part of the local geology, where they think that a part of a hill or a side of a mountain had collapsed, exposing a cave system. But I mean, this would have happened a long time ago. So I was just curious if you had any information on that.
I do. Again, from the same source, who told me that there is an extensive cave system there, but that it's locked up. It's locked up with iron gates. And, you can't get in there. And the stated reason is that there's a lot of bats in there. And then, of course, there's guano. And there's some type of fungus, some type of organism that's can give you a respiratory disease. So they don't want people going in there.
Yeah, a version of SARS, kind of like
Yeah,
COVID,
something.
supposedly.
Yeah.
So, okay, so something just hit me in the head. You published your book in March of 2018.
Yes. March 18th, to be precise.
March 18th of 2018. Michelle, when did we see that giant triangle?
That would have been March of 2018, March 9th.
March 9th, 2018.
I
And
love
then
it.
Guy had his. So we did it. If anybody's interested, you can go back and look at listen to one of our episodes with Guy Merritt describing his triangular encounter south of Flint. In 1994, he encountered his on March 18th, 1994.
That's spooky.
Now, Terry, I got to ask you, in 1977, when you guys saw this thing hovering above your campsite, what month was it?
It was June.
Oh, it was June?
Yeah,
it
Okay,
was June.
good.
Yeah.
We were working on a theory that's something about the month of March.
The Ides of March, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so, man, I have to say, the hypotheses that are going off in my brain tell me that these things that are on these triangular craft, whatever they are, what these things are, they're not good. Everybody I've talked to that has experienced so far the triangle craft, whatever this is, has not had a very good experience. Now, Terry, if you want to continue on with your story as this thing is hovering over to kind of see where I'm going with this.
Let me continue with that, but then I want to come back to that because
Okay.
that's a very interesting point, and I got some opinions I'd like to share.
Awesome.
So we watched this thing, as I think I left off that it had parked more or less at 3,000 feet over that area of the triangle. And
Right.
like I said, we were offset to the side. We were both under that weird semi-sedated state. And it shined some lights down at us and a laser beam type of thing that danced around the campsite. And again, our emotions were muted. We were just like, oh, look at that, no conversation between us. And the lights were shut off and it was still just incredibly quiet out there. And Toby stood up and said, "Show's over." And he grabbed his air mattress with this thing over our heads almost and walked over to the tent, threw his air mattress in and just fell on top of it. And I had transitioned from semi-sedated to sleepy because there's a distinct difference between the two. I felt this calm, but now I am sleepy. I mean, and I want to go to sleep. I mean, I'd been happy to sleep on that inflatable mattress right there where I was, but I felt compelled to go into the tent, and that's what I did. I didn't take off my shoes or my shirt or anything. I just threw my air mattress in, fell on top of it, and I was out. The second my head hit that plastic pillow, I was out.
That sounds very similar to when I had in 2018, I had my hip replaced. And before I went into the surgery room, the anesthesiologist came by and was talking to me, gave me a shot into my IV, which made me exactly how you're describing before you got sleepy, which just made me,
Euphoric.
yeah, just, oh man, dude, will you be my friend? This pain is gone.
Yeah.
They wheel me back, and I know I'm being wheeled back into the surgical room, in the operating room, and I know what's going on. And then they tell me, okay, sit up and put your legs over the edge of the gurney and lean forward. I feel a little wetness on my back where they were numbing the skin a little bit. And then they said, okay, lay down. And I was gone. There was no counting, none of that stuff. I was done. The next thing I knew, I was being woke up.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
there's nothing in between. There are no dreams.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So as you're recounting your experience, I'm thinking, man, that sounds like that twilight sleep kind of the first shot before surgery. Then the next thing is out.
That's exactly the scenario.
Wow.
And I woke up, and I don't know, some hours later, looking back, I can figure out that it was about an hour before sunrise. But I woke up with this flood of intense white, yellow, and orange lights coming through the canvas of the tent. I mean, real intense. And I woke up to these flashing lights, and I don't have my wits about me. And I'm thinking, what is this? And then I'm thinking, maybe these are the overhead flashing lights of a park ranger's truck, right there to kick us out. That made sense.
Right.
And I also heard this low droning sound that, if you've ever stood next to a big piece of industrial machinery, you can feel that it's more of a feeling in your chest than it is something audible that you registers with your ears and your hearing.
Sure. It's like they're like compression waves coming from a piece of heavy machinery, or where if it's operating, at such a intensity that it will vibrate the air like around it if you're close enough, and you can pick that up. Absolutely. Or it could be a very strong magnetic field, which I think you will probably talk about what you were exposed to at some point that has to do with a watch, I believe.
Yeah, we both wore mechanical watches. I mean, they're integral to being an EMT. You need them.
Right.
And we kept them pretty much synchronized. And my watch had stopped at 240. It was an Elgin. It was a nice wind-up watch, a mechanical watch, standard of the day. And I don't remember what brand, but Toby had a decent watch. Mine stopped at 240 on the nose. His stopped at 241. And those watches never worked again. And supposedly, according to the manufacturer, the warranty was voided because it had been exposed to an electromagnetic field. Because the watch was 8 months old, and it was a gift from my wife. And it went back to the Elgin Watch Company in Chicago, Illinois. And I wish I'd saved that letter. I wish I'd saved that letter in that watch.
Yeah, because they wrote you back and said, sorry, nothing we can do. You exposed this watch to a very high electromagnetic field, and that's on you.
Contrary to the conditions of your warranty. Yes.
Wow.
I wish I'd saved that. That would have been gold to have.
That absolutely, because that's a scientific test that's been done on a piece of equipment that is a key piece of evidence. Man, awesome. That's just insane.
That is insane. It is insane.
It really is.
So I wake up and I hear these things. I see these flashing lights, and I sat up and I noticed that my boots had been unlaced almost all the way down. And I knew I didn't go to bed like that. And I wouldn't have gone to bed like that. I mean, if I had to get up in the middle of the night and for some unknown reason run, I mean, I couldn't run. It'd be a trip hazard. I'd be all over the place. I would have left my boots on, laced up, or I would have taken them off, but not in between. So I'm annoyed. I'm not frightened. There's no fear yet. So I take off my boots and my socks are on sideways. Now I knew certain I didn't do that. And it hadn't hit me yet that they had undressed us and redressed us. And I take off my socks, I put them on properly, I put my boots on, I lace them up. Then I turn my attention to my friend, and he had a very dark skin. And in the flashes of the white light in particular, I could see tracks of tears. I guess if the saline in the tears fluoresce under the bright light. And I could see the streak down his face, and he'd been crying. And I couldn't imagine what would make this guy cry. And I asked him something about, what is it, man? Is it park rangers? What's out there? And he just said, shh, I think they're still out there. And I'm like, who's still out there? And he didn't answer me. And he had an episode of, he was hyperventilating for a time. And then he gets his hand on his breathing. I look out the flap of my tent on my side. And I saw this thing that had been, 3,000 feet over our heads when we went to bed has descended and now is just about 30 feet over the floor of the meadow. And that's why these lights, which were on the points of the triangle, these lights were so intense because they were just 30 feet over our heads now instead of being 3,000 feet up in the air. And that's when I saw an image of the side of the thing, and it looked like a medical building, and it was lit up like crazy. And I can't understand, how is this thing not seen in 5 counties? It makes no sense.
Yeah. Could you relate what you kind of estimate the dimensions of this craft to be?
Yes. I think I have a hand drawing of it on my terrylovelace.com page that I actually did that originally on a piece of notebook paper, and I redrew it whenever I published the book, but it's accurate. And if you look in the lower left corner, you can see little bitty images, 2 little stick figures, a car, and a tent. And I did that to try to give it some kind of scale. I'm not a cartographer. I don't have,
Right.
a good sense of that. But I can say this, that it filled that meadow. It was a city block long on each length of the triangle. And it was deep, and it was 5 stories deep.
Wow.
So it was now, what looked like a triangle, now looked more like an office building. And it was an incredible sight. And then I saw, especially in the flashes of light, what looked like a dozen, maybe 15. I didn't count them. I probably should have. Or what I first thought were children. And I asked my friend, I said, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And that's when he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. And when he said that, I was stunned. And I looked again, and I looked closer, and he was right. And then my fear level jumped from a 2 to a 10 plus. And I was just absolutely terrified that we were going to sneeze or cough or do something to draw their attention, and these little guys might come over and see us. I mean, we had no way of knowing. They were long done with us.
Right.
So after a while, we watched these guys, and they're just walking around like tourists. I mean, it's not like they're looking for something lost on the ground. They're walking around. They have, they're 3 feet tall or a little taller. They're gray. I don't know if that's garments. We were too far away to tell if that's garments or clothing. They had large heads, spindly bodies, tiny bodies, disproportionately long arms. And they walked with a distinctive gait. They walked like their knees were hinged to go backward, like an inch or 2 with every step. So it gave the impression they were dragging their feet behind them when they made a step forward. It was a weird thing to describe, but that's the best way I can describe it. And then there came a light again from underneath this thing in the dead center. And this was a column of white light about 30 feet in diameter. It was just about as broad as this thing was tall off the floor of the meadow. And it just clicked on like someone hit a switch. And it was, have you ever seen a high power searchlight cut through fog? It has that visible characteristics. Well, that's what this was, except there was no fog. As soon as it clicked on, all these little guys, it drew their attention. And they all started, not in a rush or a run, but they all started to meander toward this thing. And while we're watching, they would step into this light in 2s and 3s and just pixelate out right in front of our eyes. It would take about 20 seconds, but they would just pixel out and be gone. And then the next, they were all, they were, like I say, they were in pairs and 3s, all separated. And then they'd wait for one group to pixelate out, disappear, and then the next group of 2 or 3 would step in, and then 20 seconds or so, they'd be gone until the last 2 were gone. And as soon as the last 2 were gone, that light shut off, and that droning noise that we'd been hearing shut off. And then it was dead silent again. And the lights changed from multicolored to kind of a, it changed to totally white. And if you look at the drawing, you can see what I call a light bar. And there was a little beam of light that would travel up and down that bar. So that light bar wasn't illuminated fully. It was lit by this beam of light that would travel up and down it. And we saw this thing take off, and it didn't take off like a rocket ship. It took off like a hot air balloon and just lifted up and made a slight turn, slow at first, and then picked up speed. And we watched it till it was 3 stars and then 1 star and then gone.
Wow.
And we were terrified to leave the tent. I didn't want to leave the tent. I told Toby, man, I'm staying here till daylight. And we had no idea knowing what time it was. We knew it was after 2:40 a.m. That's all we knew. And Toby convinced me that we needed to go. And it was only a piece of canvas, but I didn't want to be exposed from the tent to the car. I felt like I'd be vulnerable.
Yeah, at least the canvas is giving you some type of cover or yeah, at least you can't easily be seen, but yeah.
And to this day, I can't cut across an open field. I won't cut across it. I'll walk 1.5 miles to go around, but I won't cut across an open field. I feel vulnerable.
Yeah, you're exposed at that point. Yeah. Wow. So do you think at that point is when they put those objects in you then at that point?
You know, the question is, how long were we aboard this thing? And I have no way of knowing. So it was probably around 4 o'clock in the morning when we woke up.
Okay.
And probably around 10:30 at night when we went to bed at the latest. So somewhere within that range, something
6 to
happened.
7 hours.
Yeah. And I don't know if all of that was spent on board or not. I do have some memories of being aboard the ship that I'll share with you. I'll share one with you real quick.
Okay.
And that was that we were frozen. That we were paralyzed. We were standing, and I had my boots and my clothing in my hands like this in front of my chest. And the only thing I could move was I could move my eyes. I could scan left to right, up and down, but I couldn't tilt my head or turn my head. I couldn't move a muscle other than rotate my eyes. And I could perceive that my friend was next to me. I don't know how, I don't think I saw him, but I knew he was there. And we saw these gray guys running around all over the place. And I have a real quick theory about what I think they are.
Okay.
And I've said this before, and I've had people say, no, you've got it all wrong. I've seen these things. You're totally wrong. That's not what they look like. That's not what they do. Well, I can only share my objective, subjective, opinion of what I saw, what I experienced, and, without embellishment. And this is what I saw. And my guess is there are probably multiple kinds of grays. But the things that I witnessed, I thought they weren't sentient in the way that you and I are alive. I thought they were more like something manufactured, maybe artificial intelligence, quantum computing, who knows? But they were task oriented. And in the book, I think I called them worker bees for that reason.
Yeah, the idea I had going through my head were these were like some kind of drones.
Yeah.
Some AI type drones or something along those lines.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Doing the dirty work of and I call it dirty work because like I said, the experiences, I know there's some people out there that say, they have communications with these things and they're telling us save the planet, yada yada, free the whales or whatever the case may be. But the ones that stick out to me are the ones that are traumatic cases, like with you, that to me, that rings more true. Because if you look at how humans have been to animals, to each other, how we explore and do things, we just kind of, we tag cattle, no big deal, put a little tag on their ear and then we harvest them. There's no real right. There's no emotion. There's no empathy, just very indifferent. And these things and these stories that I read to me just scream of being a lab rat, being observed by these things or whatever they are. I don't know. That's just my initial response. Now, that could be my own personal background and experience of my life bringing things in. I'm not a very trusting person. And, now you're talking about something that we have no idea what it is. I'm very guarded, in those regards. And when I hear these kind of stories, I just, I think of the farmer. Okay, let's get those pigs onto the truck and get them off the slaughter. No big deal. I've got a friend that I work with who, was a farmer, grew up on a farm, and now he teaches chemistry. And, he tells us stories about, you just go and grab a pig, you wrap a chain around its back legs, lift it up, and you bleed it. And, that's the way you do things. They're animals. And I'm like, these things are taking humans, putting things in them, following them, seem very indifferent. They don't respond to many cries or, why are you doing this? And the only response I've heard from some people, and I think you even say it in your book, why, they will say to you in your head, why are you scared? Why, we're not going to hurt you. But that's exactly what they're doing. Right. So I don't have a very good sense about what these things are and what their purpose is. So
I agree with you. I agree. What's crazy is, as a kid at age 8 and age 11, I saw flying saucers. Now that was cool. That was a non-threatening, exhilarating event for a child. I mean, I had no sense of danger whatsoever. But I think the things that took us in 1977, these were not the same. These were not the same beings. I don't know.
Well, it wasn't even the same craft.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, and that's funny you say that, because I when we first saw these 3 stars, I thought, could that be a spaceship? No, it can't be. I know I'm an expert on spaceships. I saw them twice. They're saucers. This isn't a saucer, ergo it isn't a spaceship, right?
Right. So there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about. You talk about seeing other saucers. Now, did at the base you were stationed at, did you and Toby get called out to a sighting on the base where there was something hovering above the base that you guys were called out to in the book?
No, there are actually 2 stories there.
Okay. I'm probably confusing them because I listened to the audio book, and so I'm recalling your voice from the book telling me. So I'm probably mixing them together.
Yeah, that was 1975, and there were actually 2 events that I tell. The first one was bitter cold, January 1975. We got a call to one of the missile sites, and it was about 30 miles away or something. They're in remote areas in the middle of 10,000 acres of soybeans or something. Keep them away from populated areas, because they're obviously targets for the Soviets.
Right.
So we got a call that was a little bit different. It was uncharacteristically slim on facts, but it just gave us notice that there was a missile technician working on a missile at a launch control facility called Kilo 5. It's not there anymore, so it doesn't make any difference if I say the name. And so we hopped in the ambulance and we went out there, and it was a weird evening. We got to within about a mile of this place, and there was this blue car with a security policeman inside the car. I'm sure he was supposed to be standing outside the car, but it's cold outside. It's like below 0.
Right.
And I pull up, I roll my window down in the ambulance, and I'm like, "Hey man, what's up at Kilo 5?" And he says, "Man, beats me, but you're the only one going in, and you're the only one coming out that I'm aware of. I don't know what's going on." I said, "All right, thanks, man." And we drove in, and it was a weird orange glow, because these security police trucks had orange and red flashing lights on top on a light bar. And but it was so cold that there was this big cloud of steam from automobile exhaust.
Sure.
And that cloud is just pulsating with these flashing lights all out of sequence, made for a really eerie sight. And we rolled up, and there was, I think, a captain. He was either a captain or a first lieutenant, and I can't remember for certain which, but I'm going to say captain because I think that's what he was. standing there with a radio in his hand, and a parka, and he's freezing. And he motions me over, and I pull over, and I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Your man's fine. We got him. We got him." And there's a little trapezoid shaped like brick building that you go in, and there's a desk, and then there's an elevator with one button, down to take you down to the base of the missile so the technicians can go in and work on the thing. And he says, your guy's in the building. We got his foot elevated on a trash can. We think he may have broken an ankle or something, but he's walking, and he's at least talking, and he's fine. He didn't hit his head or anything. But for right now, nobody comes in and nobody goes out till I say so. Park the ambulance over there and stay off the radio. I'm like, weird, yes, sir, whatever you say.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Roll the window up, we pull over and we park. And Toby and I are like, man, this is kind of odd. Why can't we go take care of our guy? We got a patient that's hurt that needs attention. And Toby says, well, I'm going to go have a little look-see. And he was kind of impulsive. And I'm like, man, we've been ordered to stay in the ambulance. And he's like, no, I'm gonna check it out. I'll get back to you. He hops out of the ambulance, and I can't see anything because the inside of the ambulance is frosting over.
Right.
And 2 or 3 minutes pass, and he opens my door and grabs me by the shoulders and says, man, you have got to see this, expletive. You have got to see this. And he's pulling me out of the ambulance. And I'm like, well, wait, man, let me grab my parka. I grab my parka, I walk out, and here's Toby and this lieutenant, and they're looking up. And lieutenant's mouth is wide open, I'm like trying to figure out what's everybody fixated on. And then I look, and about 50 feet over that blue cap that sat on top of the tube that launched the missile, 50 feet up in the air was this thing about the size of a full-size van, and it was matte black in color, and it was absolutely still. I mean, and it, when you look at it, you're saying like, well, where are the wires or something? It's just so unnatural to see something like that. No lights, no noise, just, and it was multifaceted. That's why I called it a black diamond. My friend Toby, of course, being a mathematician, had counted the facets and made a mental memory of it, was able to draw a pretty good picture of it. I wish I had it. And while we're watching, the thing shoots off and goes from 0 to 500 miles an hour and is just gone. And I'm thinking, boy, we're busted now for disobeying an order. And this captain just smiles at me like, man, did you see what I just saw? And I'm smiling back. I said, whoa, that's pretty cool. And then we both, snap back into our respective roles. And he's like, all right, I'll get the gate open, get in your ambulance. You can go in and get your man.
Right. Wow.
So that was Kilo 5. But the other thing that I mentioned was that there were numerous sightings on the base. Now, I never witnessed this. This is hearsay.
Okay.
But I was told this by several security policemen. Also, there's a gentleman by the name of Robert Hastings who wrote a book called UFOs and Nukes.
Yes. Yep. Strangely enough, I was just looking at that one on Amazon as well.
I just got an email from him. He's a friend of mine. We talk about once a week. It's a great coincidence.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. We'll get him to come on the podcast.
We'll talk to him about that. He's
yeah.
So these security policemen, and I heard this from 3 or 4 different guys that weren't connected, kind of tell me under their breath, man, I was at the armory, or I was at the ammo, I forget what they call it, a bunker where they kept the nukes. And he was guarding out there, and they saw an orange ring-like thing fly in, hover over the bunker, and shoot down a laser beam at the bunker. I guess scanning it. That's an assumption on my part, but something. And then that lasts for, 30 seconds or so. And then this laser light would vanish and the thing would just take off. And I heard that from more than a couple people. So I believe that there's some truth to that.
Well, and have you looked into any of the other, I want to say, was it Bentwaters or other nuclear bases that have come forward and people that were there. I'm trying to think of the base in the UK.
Bentwaters is right.
Is it
It's Bentwaters, and then it's the location that's different.
It's a forest.
Rendlesham Forest.
Rendlesham Forest, right.
Yes.
And people have come forward and reported those same kind of encounters where they assume that they're scanning the bunkers for nuclear missile, like information on the nuclear missiles, and being spotted over these silos. And I find it not a coincidence that you have been seeing flying saucers, or at least seeing a few flying saucers before you went in the military. You go into the military, you become a medic. You are stationed on a SAC base, which is a strategic air command base where they have nuclear weapons. Toby is a learned astrologer, wanting to learn astronomy and going to class for it, a good physicist, great mathematician. And then you guys have this encounter, which he wanted to go to this location. Were you guys set up?
Oh yeah, I think so.
I
absolutely think so. When this was all said and done, it felt like we kept an appointment. I swear, it felt like we were there right on time.
Well, it's not hard to draw those conclusions. I mean, I'm not very versed on UFOs and the whole history behind it. We had an experience where we saw what we saw that kind of led us down this path, and just using, point A to point B, logical minds. I mean, I'm a science teacher. I'm a science guy.
Yes.
I can't explain what we saw. It makes no sense at all that a black triangle floating in the air that was the size of there was an IKEA store there, and it had to be the size of that thing easily. And it was almost like the movie Predator. Like when I saw the lights kind of coming up from the street around this vehicle, they kind of disappeared into it. So you just saw like this outline. And then the three, the points of light that were, in each corner or each angle of the triangle. And the thing, I would say, could not have been more than a couple 100 feet above the ground. And it just kind of was moving west to east, turned on its axis to point toward the south, and then kind of moved parallel with us along the expressway. And then when we got beyond this retention wall, it was just gone. And the thing was huge. There was no way, without seeing it speed off or whatever, but it was just, that was it. We had lost sight of it. And I did not have a good feeling because, well, first of all, knowing about aviation and knowing
Newtonian physics.
Yeah, right. There was no way anything this big could have just been hovering like that and moving that slow. And there were no control surfaces. There were no evidence of exhaust ports or any kind of propulsion. It was just ridiculous. And that triggered this immense fear response in me. And I usually don't get that way. And I could not, my rational brain said, this isn't normal. And so, it was unnatural what I felt. And Michelle, what was it that you had said your famous line, if our military has something like that,
they're definitely not disclosing it.
Yeah. Or it was, when did we get something like that?
When I saw it, it was like, well, when did our military pick up something like that?
Yeah, it was, because I know the B-2 bomber, I know the stealth fighter, the F-117, the B-2. I know what those are. The B-2 is a giant flying wing. Yeah, you could mistake that, but I know what landing lights look like on an aircraft. I know the B-2 has to be going a certain speed to get airflow over the wings because it is a giant airfoil and you need that aerodynamic force. Well, and this was not doing that at all.
Like we said, at the time of night and exactly how low it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you talk about the fear. The fear that I experienced was a weird level of fear. I think it must have been like, from somewhere in my lower brainstem, somewhere in the reptilian brain, or
Yes.
kind of fight or flight, danger, run kind of thing.
Yeah. That was the sense I had. I usually don't get that sense either, but that was the sense I had because I was in the state of, I don't know what that is. And it's huge. And it was instant. Like, that's not supposed to be there. And it's moving in ways that it shouldn't. And now it's rotating. It's not banking. It's rotating on an axis to point that front end of the triangle, I guess you could say, the apex of the triangle in the direction that it was moving. It rotated to point that in the same direction we were going. I was not happy. And then being on the driver's side, right? Being on the driver's side, I couldn't see it anymore. So it was up to Michelle to see it. And I'm hauling ass down 275 south, and we get below this retention wall. When we popped out, it was gone. I was like, what was that? What, of course we didn't think about grabbing our phones or, starting pictures or anything. It was, for me, it was evacuate. It was,
yes.
It was get out of here. Right.
Yes.
So anyways,
people ask me all the time why we didn't take a picture of it. Well, the long story was that my good camera we left at home. Toby had a camera in his backpack a foot away from him, and the thought of using that never crossed his mind, never crossed my mind.
Well, exactly. I don't buy that as an excuse as to not believing somebody's story because they didn't grab a picture of it. And besides, it was 2:30 at night. We had all kinds of street lights around us, weird glows. Well, I mean, what kind of picture do you think you would have gotten on your phone if you tried to take a picture of that?
Oh, incredibly grainy.
It would have been horrible.
It would have been black.
Yeah, it would have just been black with maybe a couple lights if you were lucky. It wouldn't have shown anything. So, well, what happened now? So what happens after you guys stay in the tent, you see it leave, and I take it now at this point, you just want to get out of there. So what happened on that after that?
We did the classic 1, 2, 3, go kind of thing. And I took my car keys and my wallet. Toby took his flashlight and I'm sure his wallet. And we just bolted from the tent and
just left everything, right?
Left everything there. We could care less about a $10 camp, tent or, Toby's Coleman cooler.
Mm-hmm.
None of that made any difference. I wanted to get out of there with my life. And that speaks to that level of fear.
Yeah.
But something changed. We were changed. That was 1977 was a big year for me. It was like the end of my childhood. I feel like we went down there as two late teenagers, and we left there mature adults. We were different people. And not only that, but I had the band breaks up thing happen to me. I'm in the car, I'm driving, and my friend, we were both extremely burned. I had like the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life. Under my arms, soles of my feet. I mean, everywhere in my body is burned. Never peeled. I never blistered. We had some odd spots all over us, but that wasn't the big deal. The big deal was the burn and we were dehydrated terribly. And we both had flash burns to our eyes. It's the injury arc welder would get if they didn't wear that smoked glass hood.
Oh, right.
So we were hurting, and I'm in my big 66 Impala, right? And he's curled. He was a smaller guy anyway. He's curled up into a ball on the seat, and whatever they did to me, they gave him a double measure because he was sick. But what was strange was I couldn't reconcile it then, and I don't get it today. But all of a sudden, I wanted nothing to do with the guy, and I can't explain that emotion. That's not I'm normally, if I'm your friend, I'm a loyal friend. I'm a good friend. So that was really contrary to.
Yeah, and you had that feeling, but you knew that he was like your best friend. You guys were a medic team together.
Yeah.
So logically, rationally, you knew that this guy was one of your
That's
best
exactly
friends.
right. I
But
knew that on a logical level. I did, but on an
but
emotional level,
emotionally,
nope. And Robert Hastings supported that. I mean, after talking to 3,000 people like me, that's exactly what the military does. And I'm not talking about two guys seeing a silver disc dart across the sky. That's one thing, but to have the kind of experience that we had on that intimate level, they bust them up, they break them up. No, we were ordered to have no contact with one another at all.
yeah. So that's interesting. So in the book, you had mentioned that you guys were dehydrated. You had some kind of burns to the cornea of your eye, like you were saying. You had the burns all over your body, some kind of weird spots on your body, and you guys made it back 6 hours back to base. Now, did you guys go like right to the hospital at that point? Did you go home? What happened at that point?
Yeah, we lived about 4 blocks from each other on the base, and we were walking distance to the hospital.
Okay.
And I dropped Toby off. I should mention this. This is a long ride, 6-hour drive.
Right, right.
We had one conversation, and that was, we can't tell anybody we saw something from outer space the size of a Walmart. Because I guarantee, had we done that, we'd have been sent out for a psychological evaluation and discharged from the military. No doubt in my mind that would have happened.
Right.
And that I didn't want that. I was there for a purpose, for the GI Bill, to go to school. That was the purpose. It was an end to a means to an end. And Toby agreed with me. So we had then the ethical problem of then, well, how do we explain this? And I said,
Right.
well, I think here's what we do. We tell them the truth. We tell them that we went to bed early and we weren't feeling well. And we woke up sick as dogs. And we felt so bad that we left and came home and didn't care about a $10 tent. We just wanted to get home.
Right.
And so that was
just
our
leave
story.
out the part about the giant triangle that's floating above you with the little people running around when you came to.
Yeah.
And
we were members of the hospital squadron, so these people were all our friends. We knew
Right.
everyone. They knew us. And I'll say this: medical people do take care of their own. We were treated very, very well.
Yeah.
But we were broken up and isolated from one another from the start.
Yeah. And one thing that people may not be aware of, but when you are in the military and you are on a nuclear base where there's very sensitive weapons and things like that, obviously you're not allowed to take pictures anywhere on the base or anything like that. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit about some of the security protocols and things like that you guys were instructed with?
Yeah, you mean from when we landed on the base and got there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were told that they moved missiles around. They had a special van-like thing that they used to move the missiles, and guys in jeeps in front and in back, and a helicopter over the top of them, and they would move these missiles around and warheads around, and we knew where the bunkers were, where the nukes were kept, and from a block from my house, I had a clear sight of the flight line with the KC-135s lined up in back,
Sure.
and then the B-52s in front. And every so often they'd scramble them, because at this time in 1977, we had a squadron of B-52s in the air 24/7.
Yep.
And when air rotation came, these guys would take off in mass. And Whiteman Air Force Base is unique in that it had, at the time, I don't know if it does still now, but the longest flight line of any military installation in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Because when the base was built in the 40s, it was originally built as a glider base to train glider pilots. So it had a longer airstrip. And so I mean, there were security police people around, and I mean, it was just understood. It was an understood thing that you don't.
Right. Well, these are, I guess my point is that, these are very sensitive bases, weaponry, and and information that is on these bases with people living and dealing with the nuclear weapons and things like that. If you came back from a camping trip in the condition that both of you guys were in and started talking about a giant flying triangle with little people, chances are that you would not be telling us about this right now, because you'd probably be in Leavenworth or even worse, a court martial, or locked in a psychiatric ward, or charged with treason. Where are your cameras, kind of thing.
My life would have taken an entirely different trajectory. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So these are high security, high risk areas when you're dealing with those kind of things. So, yeah. So anyways, so you get to the hospital at this point, and what happens at this point?
Well, first, we went to two different exam rooms. Both of our wives drove us to the hospital independently of one another, and we saw Toby's car in the parking lot, so we knew they were there. And I was in a wheelchair. It took me into the exam room, and I had a couple of doctors, and I knew them. And the one guy asked me, he says, "Terry, man, what did you do? Did you take off all your clothes? They put you on a spit or something and rotate you? How did you get this burn?" And I said, "Doc, I don't have a clue," which was the truth. And toward the end of this medical exam, there were 4 people came into the room, one of them being the base commander, the hospital commander, and 2 guys in civilian clothes I didn't recognize. And the hospital commander said, "Sergeant Lovelace, you're to have had no contact with Sergeant Tobias in any way, shape, or form. You're not to speak to him verbally, talk to him on the phone, give him any written notes. You're not to give him anything. He's not to give you anything. If you meet him at the base exchange, you turn around and walk in the opposite direction," and on and on and on and on. Typical what you'd hear of a no contact order from a court, in a domestic violence case or something. And he finished with, "And that's an order, Sergeant. And if you disobey my order, there will be consequences."
Well, that's also something they do in criminal interrogations as well. You don't, is that not correct? You would split the parties and ask them questions and see who's telling the lie, who you can get to flip on the other person, who's really going to tell the story, and then kind of put them together and figure that somewhere in the middle must be the truth of what they're saying, right? I mean,
for a few years in American Samoa, I was U.S. territory of American Samoa. I was the DA,
right,
and I prosecuted people. So I worked with the police, and in retrospect, going back then, I mean, at 22, I had no idea. I had no life experience, no education, but a lot of what the OSI did and said and acted out was drama on their end. Theater, I should say.
Yeah. Playing to your inexperience of knowledge of the law, threatening you with court martial, and things can get really bad for you. But I just wonder if when they first initially saw you guys come in with the burns you had on your bodies, if they instantly thought you guys were somewhere, maybe not on a camping trip. I'm playing devil's advocate here, but around the nuclear weapons in some way and got radiation burns, or were doing something you weren't supposed to do, and that's why they separated you and gave you this kind of treatment. Because to me, it doesn't make sense that you would go right into almost like a criminal investigation unless there's something that they saw that said these guys were somewhere on this base, even though they say they went camping and stuff. But they could be lying. They could be agents. It's 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And Soviets had their hands in all kinds of things, in espionage and learning information and stuff. That was their knee-jerk response. But then it gets a lot stranger after that. So
it got strange for me. I was hospitalized for 2 nights and 3 days. And on the evening of the second night, when my night nurse came in, who I knew well, was going to give me an injection for pain and sleep, and they kept the lights turned off in the room because of these burns to my eyes. And these 2 guys in blue business suits followed her in. And the one guy in charge was a major, and he says, if that's going to sedate Sergeant Lovelace, it's going to have to wait because we have to ask him questions. And they pulled out badges, and they were from the OSI, and they sat down, they interrogated me. He read me my rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which scared me to death. And I'm thinking, well, you know, if I don't cooperate fully, I'm going to look like I'm hiding something and I didn't do anything wrong. You know, and you brought up a point, where did we go? Well, you know, there's a little sticker on my car and I left through the gate. So I think they knew that I left through the gate on one day and came back on another.
Okay.
Because I'm sure there were probably cameras there. I think they knew where we went, and I think they know what we saw. And I think that because this agent, the special agent from the OSI, scared me to death with intimidation. Like I said, theater, in retrospect. And then he had assigned me. I signed a lot of forms, an NDA, and a bunch of stuff. And after this long exchange of intimidation, the nurse came back in and says, "Doctor wants him to have this now." And the major says, "Oh, it's fine. We're done. We're done. We're just taking off." So I get my injection, and the captain leaves. There was a captain along with him who didn't say a word hardly. And then there was just the major and I in this room. And the major got down next to my ear, and he had this Louisiana accent like Calvin Parker has. He says, "Son, I know, and you two knuckleheads stumbled onto something while you were out there, and I think you know what I mean." And I didn't answer the guy because I didn't know how to answer the guy. And he says, "Oh, yeah, I think you know what I mean. All I want to know is how many pictures of it did you take?" And, you know, without thinking, I blurted out, "Sir, I never took a single picture." And he just smiled, you know, because he had an admission. Yep. He knew that I knew that he knew, and, you know, that's all that needed to be said. And he said, "You know, I need your camera and your film." And I said, "Sir, I never took a picture, you know," and never. They searched my house. They searched my car. You know, there's nothing on my camera. It's empty. You know, it's a camera bag with a camera with lenses in it. And
they're terrifying, or they're traumatizing and terrifying your wife during this time as well.
They did.
Right?
You know,
going
they had
through
my
your
consent.
house.
Yeah. I mean, they were courteous. They didn't tear up the house, but they thoroughly searched through everything that we own, you know. And what was curious was, you know, I had a camera I couldn't use much, but I had a new camera and I had a new telephoto lens. So at night I'd go out in the backyard and set up my camera on a tripod. And if we had a really nice, cool looking full moon, I'd take pictures of the full moon and then take them in on my enlarger and blow them up. And they made interesting prints. I didn't see any anomalies or UFOs or anything on it. It was just a picture of the moon. Mm-hmm. And they took those. They took those. They took my wife's little 35 millimeter camera. We got the camera back. They kept the film. You know, birthday party pictures, you know, nothing.
Right.
But no, somehow they knew. I don't know how they knew, but they knew.
So one part of the book after this happens, you have an encounter with Brad. Let's call him Brad. Mm-hmm. That was extremely terrifying to listen to that, because I can't even explain unless people hear this or read it in the book, which I highly recommend everybody read this book. It's like something out of a Kubrick film. You can call me Brad, and I'm going to call
my name.
That is my name. Right. It was like
creepy.
Is he going to get some tape out and tape your eyelids open so you can't, you know, and start the brainwashing tree? I mean, it was bizarre.
It was bizarre. It was bizarre. And, you know, and he sat down and shook my hand. He didn't act like a military officer. He carried himself like a priest or something. And he knew I was from St. Louis. So he starts rattling off some landmarks and, you know, Ragazzi's and the Busch Stadium and all this stuff. And
okay.
I'm like, yeah. And then I realized, hey, wait a minute, you're feeling comfortable with this guy.
Now you went back after you were released out of the hospital. Let me see if I've got the timeline right. you were released out of the hospital, and then you were like, I'll take a polygraph to prove, right? I'll prove my innocence, or at least I'll prove to you that I'm telling the truth. Because the OSI guys ended up telling you, or was it the base commander or
It
the
was
hospital?
the OSI guy on the phone.
Okay. I told you that you were on federal land and this was a possible uranium deposit you guys stumbled upon.
Oh no, that was the doctor. That was the old,
the doctor?
old
Okay.
colonel. Yeah, there was this old guy. I mean, I don't know how he was on active duty. I mean, but this doctor who carried himself like he was 70 and half senile, but you know, he had birds on his shoulders, so he was in charge. And he came into my room and sat on the bed and was very kind, very cordial, and said, "Well, you know, we figured this all out for you. The you guys had laid on those rocks, and those gave you some burns, but that's natural. It's from radiation, and you'll be fine from it." And then he says, "And now I thought this was interesting. Now this you'll probably have some funny dreams after this." He was definitely right about that. Right. He says, "But you know what? If you don't talk about them or share them with anybody, they'll just go away." And he says, "Besides, this is nobody's business, and you know you shouldn't talk about it." And I said, "Yeah, you know, Doc, yeah, I do. I understand. Yes, sir. You know, it was a bad experience. I got no reason to tell anybody anything." And he said, "That's good. That's good. That's good." But he made it sound like there was a rational explanation for everything that happened to us, you know, and medically I knew different. I don't know what happened to us, but I know we weren't laying on a plutonium rock.
Right.
Uranium deposit. Yeah.
But so you decide you want to do a polygraph and you're going to meet with the OSI guys again. And they bring in this character, who goes by Brad. Now, everything you explain in the book about this guy and the methods that they were going to use, some type of a hypnosis and a drug-induced state. To me, in 1977, that sounds eerily of CIA.
You know, I put a little email address in the back of Devil's Den in the epilogue, and I said, if you've had an experience, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but write to me and I'll write you back. And you know, if you want to discuss something with somebody, you can do it with me in absolute anonymity. And I thought, man, I bet I get 100 emails. Well, when I wrote the second book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, I'd received over 1,400.
Wow. I
have 1,700 now. And I've talked to a lot of people who told me that they had the same kind of visit. And sodium amytal, I didn't know what the drug was. They told me that sodium amytal was the drug that they used on me. Used it by the gallons in 1970, 1960s. Yeah. And wow.
Okay. But now I know that you and Toby had this falling out. You were told to stay away. He ends up getting orders to go to Japan.
That's right.
Correct. Yeah. So they're definitely breaking the families apart and moving him and his family far from you. So you guys are separated. And I know you didn't have much contact with them except to basically, you know, say goodbye.
I want to explain that. I do.
Yeah.
Because emotionally, on my logical side, I knew that I'd worked for 3 years with this guy. Our wives were friends. We were friends. You know, I felt like I owed him a pat on the back, shake his hand, good luck in Japan, and it's been a privilege to work with you. And I felt like I really had to do that. I mean, I felt a real strong compulsion to do that, and I felt like if I could do that, I could gain some measure of peace with this,
right?
And closure, whatever you want to call it. And so we were coming back from a grocery store, and I told my wife, 4 blocks away, I said, swing by Toby's. I want to run in and just tell him goodbye. And she's like, Terry, don't mess with these OSI people. She was against it, but, you know, she relented and pulled over. And I hopped out of the car and I ran up to the door. Same door I'd walked through 100 times before. It's never locked. I know that. I turned the knob and I knocked 3 times on the door like I always did. And I said, hey, guys, it's me. And I stepped inside the house. And his wife walked by, and they were packing. And she gave me a very hard look, and she said, "You're not supposed to be here."
Mm.
And I said, "I know, I'm not here to confront anybody. I just want to say goodbye to my friends." And she kept walking, and Toby heard our exchange and came from around the corner from the bedroom and walked up the hallway. And when I saw him, it wasn't like seeing my friend. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt stunned. I just felt weird. I just felt nervous, anxious. And I went in there with the intent to hug the guy and say, great working with you. I thought that would be appropriate, but I didn't do that. And he walked up to me, and he looked like a train wreck. I mean, he was shorter than I was, but he was always meticulous about his appearance. And I mean, he was the guy that always had the, pressed uniform and his shoes shined
Right.
and a haircut within regs. And, I was the slob of the two, but he was always, even when we played volleyball or something, he managed to look good somehow. I don't know. He was very particular about his appearance. And he came around, his hair was all wonky. He had a growth of beard and dirty clothes. I cut him some slack because he is moving. But he walks up to me, and I stuck out my hand at the same time he stuck out his hand, and we missed each other, and we finally managed to do this inelegant kind of handshake.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I hear you're going to Japan. I just want to wish you well. And it's been good working with you." And he's looking up at me, and I can smell liquor on his breath. Now, Toby wasn't a drinker at all.
Mm.
He might drink a beer at a barbecue, but if he had a second can, half of it would go into chicken on the grill or something. He was not a drinker. And it smelled like hard liquor. It wasn't beer. And his eyes were bloodshot. And he looked up at me, and he had tears in his eyes. They didn't run down his cheek, but his eyes teared up. And he just said to me, "It happened, didn't it, Terry?" And I said, "Yes, my brother, it happened. You're not losing your mind." And then he said, "Yeah, but why us?" And I'll tell you, that just struck me like somebody smacked my face. And I looked down, it broke from his gaze. I looked down at my shoes. I said, "Man, I don't have a clue." And I ran out of the house. And I left there thinking I'd have some type of a peace, closure, but no, it was nothing but anxiety.
Now, was that the last contact then you had with Toby at that point?
It was.
And then eventually he ended up passing away.
He did. He passed away in September of 2007. So we had all of those years that we could have been together,
Yeah.
As two old guys sit around a barbecue and have a beer and talk about what, that day at Devil's Den. That never got to happen.
Now, one of the questions I had for you was, did you ever find out, did Toby ever disclose or find out himself that he might have had the same type of leg implants that you did?
I didn't discover mine till 2012, and he was dead for 5 years by that time.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, did he have the same kind of childhood experiences that I had?
And that too, right?
If you read that poem in the beginning of Incident at Devil's Den, there's a poem that I wrote, 1973, high school stuff.
Right.
But that poem spells out very clearly my experience with these non-human entities that came to visit me as a child. And I'd like to know if they visited him too. I bet they did.
That would be, you hear of some people that have these experiences. At least I have heard about this, where people will be abducted and come back and be different, like their family relationships fall apart or their marriages fall apart and things like that. But also some people will come away, I don't want to say gifts because that sounds all sci-fi-ish, but like an awakened interest in something that they were never interested in. So for instance, where my mind is going is something like this happened to Toby as a child, or he had those same kind of experiences, which gave him the interest, and he worked, and maybe the ability to work toward being, as a city boy, somebody who is interested from Flint, Michigan, of being a astronomer and an awesome physicist and mathematician.
Yeah.
And you hear about some of these people that return like that. I wish I could remember some examples other than that one. That just
I've got 100. I've got
Okay.
100 from people that have written to me. I've got 100. I've
Wow.
got one or two that stand out, and the one that stands out is in the back of the second book, The Reckoning.
Okay.
And this woman is a nurse anesthetist, 67 years old, and she told me about when she was 9 years old. She and her 7-year-old sister went on an annual summer vacation trip with their parents to their maternal grandparents' farm in Oklahoma somewhere. They'd spend a week or two with the grandparents, and they'd done that every year that they could remember. And I'll make this short. It was a big old farmhouse with a high, maybe a 12-foot high berm of dirt, just wide enough for a tractor to cut across, separating the front yard from the backyard. The front yard was cut grass and flowers and trees. The backyard was a working farm with a farm pond, 8 to 12 feet deep. And they didn't want the girls to ever cross over the berm. This was the first year they were allowed to play outside without direct adult supervision because they knew they could be trusted not to go over the berm.
Okay.
She said that they heard, quote, calliope music. And if anybody doesn't know what a calliope is, circuses used to have the steam operated thing with pipe organ type affair. Distinctive sound, distinctive music. And
very creepy too.
Very creepy. And the younger girl, Molly, says it's a circus. But of course the music's coming from the other side of the berm. And Julia says, we can't cross the berm, you know the rules. And Molly, who may have made a good lawyer, says, yeah, but we can't, nothing says we can't stand on top of the berm and just look over. And so they did. And she claims that they saw a carousel. And the horses looked like they were alive. And it was 3 times bigger than any carousel they'd ever seen in their life. And it was wrapped with Christmas lights all around. And it was 3 or 4 feet off the ground because they could see a distinct shadow underneath it. So I'm sure that was a screen memory of some kind. Long story short, they disappeared. They were gone for 4 hours, had a massive search. They were dragging the pond, afraid that the girls would drown. The girls suddenly reappear, sitting dry as a bone, laying back, sound asleep, holding hands on the side of this berm. Just boom, they're back. And no memory of anything that happened. No memory. The last thing they remembered, I ended up meeting this woman in person, and they no memory of it. She said the last thing she remembers was climbing to take a look over the hill, and she remembers seeing this giant, crazy circus ride, and just quote being mesmerized by it. That's the last thing she said. But the point of the story is that when they left there, they left as 2 different little girls. While they had been really close, really tight as sisters, now there was something between them. And Julia, who had struggled in school with math and science, is suddenly a math wizard. She goes back and starts fractions, and it's like, bingo, no problem. So goes from being a solid C student to an honor student and, taking upper level classes. Molly takes a downward trajectory and is sullen and unapproachable and complaining and genuinely not happy with life, and just went from being a happy girl to an unhappy little girl. And I asked her, well, when you guys were adults, did you talk about what happened on the farm? And that's when she told me that Molly had passed away 5 years earlier. Yeah, I don't know what date it would be. 5 years earlier from when we talked, and from breast cancer. And she took Family Medical Leave Act time to be with her while she was in hospice toward the end. And one day she mustered up the courage to say, "You want to talk about what happened at Grandpa's that day?" And she turned her face to the wall and said, "No." And died shortly thereafter.
Wow.
Would not talk about it. But Julia absolutely left with a gift. She got the benefit, Molly got the burden. So go figure.
Yeah. Man, that's quite the story. And you said you've got at least 100 of stories like that.
I do.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I know it's getting on in time here and it's getting late. Let's see. There's a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. That was the implant one. And any idea what the implants in your leg might have been for? Like, any idea?
I don't.
Nothing?
I mean, I can guess all day long or make assumptions, but I don't have a clue.
Okay. All right. And one of the last things I wanted to ask you is, since you've written the book now and you kept this quiet for fear of backlash and professional backlash and things like that until 2018 when you published the book, Incident at Devil's Den. Since then, have you had any further issues or contact with anybody from OSI coming to visit you, or any other kind of 3-letter agencies or anything like that with the information
I can
that
tell
you
you
put out
this.
there?
From the day I published the book, within 3 weeks, I felt like I'd poked a bear. I mean,
Really?
yeah, really. I had, well, first of all, in April, I got a call and I pick up the phone. I saw the call was from Los Angeles. I got friends in LA and I thought that's one of my friends. I pick up this phone and it says, "Is this Terry?" I said, "Yeah, this is Terry. Who's this?" And he says, "Terry, this is Tom DeLonge." And I had no idea, Blink 182. I didn't know who Tom DeLonge was.
Oh, right.
So I said, "Well, hi, Tom."
He was working with Bigelow or something like that. Is that correct?
He,
with NIDS?
TTSA, To the Stars Academy.
Okay.
And he worked with Chris Mellon, recently on the news, Hal Pudoff, a couple other guys I will mention, and then, of course, Lou Elizondo.
Right.
And Lou was in on the call. And we talked about my book for a while. And he said, "Well, I think Lou wants to come visit you. And he's just going to do a, quote, turn and burn and maybe spend a day there." And I said, "That'd be fine. He's more than welcome." So one thing led to another, and that never happened until late 2018. I started having these helicopters buzz my house. And I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but I got 168 photographs of unmarked helicopters. Matter of fact, it's the month of March 2019, there was an article in the Dallas Morning News. I don't remember the day. I got a copy of the paper somewhere. Back in not the news section, but and the question was in bold headlines, "Why are there so many military helicopters over Dallas?" And then in the first paragraph, it says, "Military helicopters reported in Dallas and Garland." Garland was the community where I lived in. And I read it to my wife and she says, "Yeah, I know where they're at. They're over our house," And I mean, seriously, it was kind of funny at first. I mean, it was kind of like, oh, they rerouted the traffic copter or something. But no, it got to be untenable. We sold the house that I really didn't want to sell. We sold it and we moved.
Yeah.
Lou Elizondo flew down and spent 2 days with me.
Now, was this when he was still director of ATIP?
Oh, no. He was an
He had
employee.
left?
He was a civilian working for To the Stars Academy.
Okay.
And brought a cameraman down who wanted to film my story. And we're sitting in my living room and his cameraman is filming away. And his The cameraman says, got a bad battery. Battery drops from 90% to 0. And he says, I got more out in the car. So he's annoyed. He runs out to the car and grabs a couple batteries, comes back in, pops one in. We start filming again with 100% battery. 5 minutes later, it drops to 0. That's the kind of stuff that happens. That's the kind of stuff we've experienced.
Wow.
Strange cars being followed by people. Just a lot of really weird things. I could talk for, it would take an hour to tell you all the stories, but
Yeah.
you know, my television, our television set, since 2018, since I published the book, television set in the living room turned itself on at 2 a.m. Poltergeist kind of stuff.
Right.
You know, my wife and now, whichever one of us is more awake, we'll go just turn it off and say aloud, hey, knock it off. And we go back to bed. It's not a big deal anymore. It's a nuisance, but it's not scary anymore.
Right. Okay. What are your thoughts with what is being every time we do a podcast, it seems like we've got news of UFO this, UFO that, in CNN, local Fox News. What are your thoughts on all of this going on and this report that's supposed to be out in June? What do you, taking all that in, what do you think?
I'll tell you what I can intuit and my opinion.
Okay.
And that is that I know how the military works, and a naval commander doesn't get on national television and tell a story like Commander Fravor told about the Tic Tacs harassing his F-18. That just doesn't happen.
Right.
You know, I had a gentleman who was aboard the Princeton contact me. I had another gentleman who was aboard the Roosevelt contact me because they read my books, and I guess they identified with me being military.
Right.
And yeah, you know, something's going on. Like I say, these people that are coming forth and are telling these stories that are affiliated with the military, that permission to do that comes from the highest level. That comes from the executive level of government, not the legislative, not the judicial. That comes from the executive branch, from the president of the United States. And everything happens for a reason. There's timing behind all this. You know, they know, and they could have told us back in December. They could have told us 10 years ago, but they didn't. But they think June is the right time to tell us. And my guess is, from my limited knowledge of working as a civil servant, is they know, and they know that something's going to happen. And they feel that it's in the best interest of our national security to tell everybody up front, guys, you know, we may have been wrong about this stuff. We don't know what they are, but, you know, to prepare us because something's coming.
Yeah.
Everybody that I know that's in this field feels it. I feel it. Something's coming. And there was a doctor from Israel, Haim Ashed, who was quoted in the Jerusalem Post on December 8th of 2020, saying that the United States and Israel have been in a treaty with the Galactic Federation for many years, and that President Donald Trump had plans to make full disclosure to the United States people, and that, quote, Dr. Ashed's words were, E.T. dissuaded him from making that disclosure. And he said, now this is curious words. He said, you know, disclosure shouldn't be made because, and disclosure shouldn't be made until they understand the nature of space and spaceships. Now, I don't know if they means government or they means the public or they means both, but understands the nature of space and spaceships. Those 6 words, just, I run them over in my head and I'm thinking, what do they mean? And I think that what we're going to find out is this stuff isn't at all what we think it is.
Right.
I think they're going to tell us that, you know, there's a layer above Newtonian physics, you know, that we call quantum physics. And there's another layer above that we don't know about. And I know this sounds crazy, but I really feel that the universe is a living entity in itself. It's an organism. And I think they're, to use the word from the 80s, the paradigm's going to change.
Yeah.
Um,
I have no idea what to make out of it and what might be coming. I find it extremely strange. And then, President Trump put in the stimulus bill that, hey, I will sign this as long as you present a report in June after I'm not president anymore about what we know about UFOs. And oh, by the way, while I'm as president, let's create this thing called Space Force. Now, you know what?
why?
Why? I mean, my scientific mind wants to jump to, okay, maybe it has to do with asteroid impacts or these kind of things. But now you flip on the news almost any day, and now you have 2018 released videos from certain destroyers being followed, perfectly
Harassed.
matched, right, or harassed, that they have filmed, a couple thousand feet, whatever, above the destroyers. Now we're talking about an American U.S. Navy destroyer that if somebody flying a plane tried to get close to them without identification or whatever, would have been blown out of the sky 80 miles from the ship.
Guarantee you.
I mean, but here
the
they show these triangular craft.
Pyramids.
Pyramids,
Even.
right.
Three-dimensional pyramid.
Yeah.
There's a clue. There's a clue here.
Mhm.
And that is when Senator Harry Reid started the program that Lou Elizondo ran.
Yep,
That was
that
called
ATIP program.
the
Yeah.
Advanced Aerial Threat. That word threat
Yep.
in military parlance, in the military, the word threat has a different meaning than you and I would use it as civilians. When they say threat, they mean threat to national security.
Well, it's just to draw a parallel to that, it's just like when somebody says that they have a theory. And in science, when you're classically trained in science, a theory is not an idea. Most people say, oh, I have a theory about this. Well, you have a hypothesis. Right. You have an idea, but a theory is backed up by evidence, like the theory of evolution. We've got the fossil record that shows us about the evolution of species. Now, it doesn't explain how the species started, where life came from. It just shows a progression of how life has changed based on environment, right? So, yeah, threat. When Navy or the military says threat, that's a little bit different.
It is threat to national security. So we're in for a wild ride. I think something is very big and something is coming.
Well, I think it was Lou Elizondo or it was Jeremy Corbyn, who, it might have been both of them, stating in one of the interviews that I've seen, there's been so much information just coming in, it's hard to keep track anymore. But they said that these vehicles are operating within our airspace with impunity. They just do what they just, now they got them going into the ocean. And it was everybody at one point were laughing about the the History Channel shows about USOs, underwater, unidentified submerged objects. Now they have them on video.
Yeah. I got emails from guys that served on Navy ships that talked about this, cigar-shaped metallic craft the size of a carrier, or pardon me, a destroyer that they were on, come out of the water without breaking a wave. Now, how does that work?
Yeah, and I think the word that they used was now transmedium. They can go from space to atmosphere to water operations without a hitch. And the interview I saw with somebody from the Washington Examiner says that in this report, be expecting to see sonar data from submarines, nuclear submarines that have sonar data of these unidentified submerged objects doing hundreds of knots.
Miles per hour.
Yeah, underwater.
Yeah.
Underwater.
I got an email from a guy who told me that, said he was aboard a boomer, a nuclear
Yeah.
big submarine with very sophisticated radar that can identify a ship. I mean, they can
Yeah.
run the signature of the from the propellers in the water and track that too. Well, that's L47 vessel, this number, and I
Right.
know exactly which ship it is.
Right.
So
Yeah, I agree. We're in for a wild ride, and I think over the years it's been building up to this point, and I think now it's gotten to the point that the government will probably say, look, everybody, we just didn't want to panic you, but now at this juncture in our existence, here's where we're at. I understand the whole national security thing back in the 70s and 80s, and when I was in the military in the 80s and 90s, it was the Russian bear. It was always
yeah.
you got to protect, because that's what's going on. But they would not admit that there were some kind of holes in our defensive systems that allowed these vehicles, whatever they were, to operate, land, scan nuclear missiles, or whatever the case may be. They were not going to admit that at all for national security reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
my guess is they're going to make a disclosure because they know it's going to be evident and they want to beat them to the punch and say,
yeah, I agree. Okay. Well, in closing, any closing remarks you want to leave us with? And please tell us about, you have a website out there. You have started a podcast on YouTube. So why don't you give us some information on that? And what's really awesome is how you got us in contact with what you're doing this summer, Contact in the Desert. So
Yes.
before
Thank
we
you.
go, yeah.
Contact in the Desert is the world's largest UFO conference. It's been a privilege of mine since 2018 to attend every year. I can tell you that everybody that's anybody in this UFO culture, and there's a very active, very lively UFO community that I had no idea existed until I got into this in 2018, with some amazing people. Linda Moulton Howe. I mean, I could name the list, but if you're listening to my voice, chances are you know them too, and they're going to be there too. I'm going to be there. I have a presentation to make, and I'm going to focus on my second book. So this won't mostly be a rehash of what you just heard.
Right.
But it's June 25th through 28th. It's a virtual conference, but it's set up in a really cool way where you can attend virtually. You have a little avatar and you can go to meeting rooms. I'm going to give a presentation. I'm also going to do a workshop. I'm doing a workshop for experiencers based on the data that I collected from these 1,700 emails that I've got from people. And what I did was I put them out on an Excel spreadsheet looking for commonalities. And I found some. And so if you think you've had an experience or if you're just curious, please come to my presentation, my workshop. But come anyway, it's going to be awesome. My books are Incident at Devil's Den, for sale on Amazon, or I think you can pick it up on the website.
Fantastic book. I mean, terrifying and well written. And if you get a chance to get the Audible version and listen to Terry read the book so you can get that inflection in the voice and things like that, that's how I love to read, and it changes the story. So just for people's, I'm not a big book reader, I'm a listener, and it was just fantastic. I can't give enough praise to that book, because I'm definitely picking up the second one, which you're going to talk about now.
I am. I'm happy to say both books hit #1 bestseller on Amazon. The second book is Devil's Den: The Reckoning. I put that out December 20th of 2020. I lost a year because of COVID,
Right. Everybody has.
Yeah. So the book is out. The Kindle is out. I'm working on an audiobook. Halfway done with it.
Awesome.
So I hope to, before June 25th, I hope to have it up and on Amazon available for sale. So check Amazon and look for it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be your guest tonight. Thanks to you and Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we are very happy to have you.
Yeah, we appreciate you making time for us.
Yes. And also, Terry does have his own podcast now on YouTube. Just, I think you call it Devil's Den Podcast, correct?
I do. We
Yep.
filmed about 7 segments.
Okay.
I'm going to be making a change to a radio station.
Oh, okay.
That I really shouldn't announce now because we're working out the details. But,
Okay. Right.
I'm
Right.
going to have a weekly radio show soon.
Awesome.
That
That is great
doing
news.
that instead of the podcast, but
Okay.
same idea. I'm going to have guests and cool stuff, and if it's esoteric, it's there.
Right. Right. People love listening to the stories. I mean, I grew up listening, with my mom, and listening to AM radio and all the different shows as a small child, and just love listening to people talk and tell their stories.
Yes.
And podcasting to me is AM radio in the future.
It is.
And you can have these long form conversations. Like, I'm not sure how long we've been talking here, probably 2 hours.
Yeah, gotta be.
At least. And, it feels like it's been 10 minutes.
Always, every time.
And it's just amazing. And then once again, your website is just terrylovelace.com. Right?
Yes. I don't have my second book. It's ill maintained. I'm lazy. I don't have the second book up on there. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you go on that website, you can see the picture that Terry drew of the craft. It's on his website. If you click on the About Me page, you can see a pretty extensive bio. It's more extensive than what Michelle and I said at the beginning of this podcast. And there's also 2 x-rays that you guys can all look at and see about the objects that were found in his leg. It's fascinating. So anything else, Terry, that you want to leave us with?
Let's all see what happens in June.
Exactly.
Maybe you guys will have to have me back and we'll talk about it.
Oh, I'll tell you what, as soon as you get that, The Reckoning, record it. And I listen to it, I've got to bring you back. We've got to have you come back on and to tell us about this radio show. Sounds very, very interesting.
I would love to have the opportunity to tell the world, tell your awesome listening audience, and share that with them too.
Well, again, we just want to say thank you for coming on and helping our little podcast that, due to our experience, we've been brought into this community, I don't even know how to explain it, but it has been a wild ride. I mean, it is all I can say.
Yeah, we're members of the community.
Yeah.
We're in a club.
Yeah, yeah. And depending on how you view that club, you may not want to be in the club. I don't know. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Terry. And we look forward to having you back on. It was a privilege and a pleasure to speak with you. So just want to say again, thank you very much.
Great. I'll talk to you guys soon. Good night,
All right.
Michelle.
Good night. Have a great night.
You too.
And we will be in touch.
Take care, Wayne.
Thank you. Wow, Michelle.
That was quite the recollection.
I just am at a loss for words with that interview.
Well, and I think the digging into most recent events in the Devil's Den area has me mind blown.
Yeah, that really kind of struck a chord with you a little bit with the mother that had died in 2018, and then the part of the one young man's skull that was found, and that was it. It's just mind-boggling.
It's like, what's next?
Yeah, I don't want to ask that. I'm afraid to know what's next. Well, I guess we'll find out in June. So, all right, everybody. We really hope that you enjoyed that interview with Mr. Terry Lovelace. Please check out his books Incident at Devil's Den, and then Devil's Den: The Reckoning. Incident at Devil's Den is a fantastic yet terrifying account of what Terry and his friend Toby went through in 1977, and to keep it secret all these years, to finally release the book in 2018, March of 2018, I might add. You can find Terry's website at terrylovelace.com. You can also find his podcast on YouTube. It is under Devil's Den Podcast. Just search for that on YouTube and you will find his video feed, and you can subscribe to that. Very awesome news that he has a radio show that's going to be starting, a weekly radio show, which is amazing. Very glad to have him tell us about that. So there's some breaking news, I guess.
And don't forget to check Terry Lovelace out at Contact in the Desert,
Yes.
along with the many other guest speakers.
So I guess with that, I don't think anything else can be said or needs to be said at this point.
Nope. Until next time, everyone.
Keep your eyes to the sky.
You have been listening to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. You can reach us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at mi_UFO and join our Facebook group by searching for Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters. So until next time.